March 15, 2011. Culver City, California. 2:47 p.m. Charlie Sheen was in the middle of delivering what would become one of his most infamous monologues when his assistant walked onto the set. The cameras were rolling for his webcast Sheen's Corner. 37 minutes into what was supposed to be a routine rant about winning and tiger blood, Charlie saw something in his assistant's face that made his voice trail off. Mid-sentence. Sarah Martinez had been Charlie's assistant for 6 years. She'd seen him through rehab stints, divorce proceedings, and public meltdowns. She'd learned to stay invisible during his webcasts, to never interrupt unless the building was on fire. But that Tuesday afternoon, Sarah walked directly into frame, holding her phone with a look that Charlie had never seen before. Complete fear. To understand what happened in that moment, you need to understand where Charlie Sheen was in March 2011. He wasn't just famous. He wasn't just controversial. He was the center of a cultural storm that had consumed American media for 3 weeks straight. Every word he spoke made headlines. Every interview spawned 1,000 memes. He was simultaneously the most watched and most worried about man in Hollywood. 3 weeks earlier, Charlie had been fired from 2.5 Men, the CBS sitcom that had made him the highest paid actor on television. $8 million per episode. 48 episodes over 2 seasons. A contract worth $384 million. Gone. The official reason was his public attacks on the show's creator, Chuck Lorre. The real reason was more complicated. Charlie Sheen had been living on the edge for years. But in early 2011, something had shifted. The drinking, the drugs, the erratic behavior had all accelerated into something darker. His publicist had quit. His agent had stopped returning calls. His father, Martin Sheen, had stopped visiting. Even his closest friends were keeping their distance. The man who'd built a career on controlled chaos had lost all control. But Charlie wasn't retreating. He was doubling down. If Hollywood wouldn't have him, he'd create his own platform. Hence Sheen's Corner, a live webcast filmed in his Mulholland Drive mansion and streamed to millions of viewers who couldn't look away from what felt like a slow-motion car crash. The production was amateur but compelling. One camera, minimal lighting, no script, just Charlie, unfiltered and uncensored, broadcasting his breakdown to the world. The format was simple. Charlie would sit in his living room, sometimes alone, sometimes with whoever happened to be around, and talked about winning, about his goddesses, about how he was a warlock with tiger blood and Adonis DNA. The audience never knew if they were watching comedy or tragedy. The comment sections exploded with debates. Was this performance art? Mental illness? A publicity stunt gone wrong? That Tuesday, March 15th, Charlie had been particularly animated. He was wearing a black baseball jersey with winning written across the front. His hair was unkempt. His eyes were bright, too bright, with that artificial energy that comes from staying awake too long. He'd been talking for 37 minutes straight about his lawsuit against CBS, about how he was going to destroy Chuck Lorre, about how America was finally seeing the real Charlie Sheen. His gestures were exaggerated. His voice carried that manic edge that his friends had learned to fear. "I am on a drug," he'd said, pointing directly at the camera. "It's called Charlie Sheen. It's not available because if you try it once, you will die. Your face will melt off and your children will weep over your exploded body." The line would be replayed on every news channel within hours. Social media erupted with reactions. #winning became a trending topic. Charlie Sheen was trending worldwide, and he was feeding off the attention like it was oxygen. The viewers, over 2 million of them, were eating it up. Comments flooded the screen faster than anyone could read them. Retweets exploded across Twitter. Cable news networks were cutting to live feeds of a man who seemed to be having a public breakdown in real time. CNN had a split screen showing Charlie on one side and psychiatrists analyzing him on the other. It was entertainment and tragedy fused into something new and uncomfortable. And then Sarah Martinez walked into frame. Charlie stopped talking immediately, not because he was angry about the interruption, but because of what he saw in her face. Sarah's complexion had gone gray. Her hands were shaking. She was holding her phone like it contained something toxic, something that might contaminate everything around it. "Sarah," Charlie said, his voice suddenly different, quieter. The manic energy that had sustained him for 37 minutes vanished in an instant. The performer disappeared, replaced by something more fragile. Sarah leaned down and whispered something in his ear. The microphone didn't pick it up, but the cameras caught everything else. Charlie's face went completely blank. His mouth opened slightly. His hands, which had been gesticulating wildly throughout the webcast, fell to his sides like a marionette whose strings had been cut. For 15 seconds, Charlie Sheen said nothing. On a live webcast being watched by millions of people, He simply stared at something off camera. His breathing became visible. Quick, shallow breaths like he'd been running. His chest rose and fell rapidly. The cocky smile that had been permanently affixed to his face melted away. Finally, he looked back at the camera. We need to stop for a minute. His voice had lost all its bravado. He sounded like a child who'd just learned something terrible. But he didn't stop the cameras. They kept rolling as Charlie stood up from his chair and walked to the window. They captured him, running his hands through his hair repeatedly. They showed him turning back towards Sarah, saying something the microphone couldn't catch. His body language had completely changed. The swagger was gone. He moved like someone who'd just been punched in the stomach. The viewers in the chat were going crazy. What's happening? Is this part of the show? Charlie looked scared. Someone call 911. The comments were scrolling so fast they were just a blur of confusion and concern. Charlie walked back to his chair, but didn't sit down. He looked directly into the camera and said, "Something's happened. I can't do this right now." His voice cracked on the last word. This wasn't the Charlie Sheen who'd been ranting about tiger blood and Adonis DNA. This was someone else entirely. Someone smaller, more fragile, more human. Sarah appeared in frame again, reaching for something off camera. The stream ended abruptly. Black screen. The 2 million viewers were left staring at nothing, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Within minutes, the clip was everywhere. YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, cable news. But nobody knew what had happened. Speculation ran wild across social media. Was it part of the act? Had Charlie finally snapped completely? Was someone hurt? Had he been arrested? The theories multiplied faster than the facts could catch up. The truth was worse than anyone imagined. The phone call Sarah had received was from Charlie's brother, Emilio Estevez. Their father, Martin Sheen, had been found unconscious in his Malibu home. Heart attack. Massive. He was in surgery at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. The doctors weren't sure he would survive the operation. The family was being told to prepare for the worst. For all of Charlie's public bravado, for all his talk about being a warlock with special blood, there was one person whose opinion still mattered to him. One person whose love he'd never questioned, even when he'd disappointed him repeatedly. One person who still saw the scared kid from Dayton, Ohio, underneath all the Hollywood nonsense. His father. Martin Sheen hadn't spoken to Charlie in 2 weeks. Not since Charlie had gone on Alex Jones' radio show and claimed that 9/11 was an inside job, while clearly intoxicated. Martin had called Charlie that night, not angry, but heartbroken. "You're better than this, son. I know you are, but I can't watch you destroy yourself anymore. When you're ready to get help, really ready, you call me. Until then, I need to step back." Those were the last words his father had said to him, a loving ultimatum that Charlie had ignored in favor of more webcasts, more interviews, more public destruction. Now Martin was fighting for his life, and Charlie was 200 miles away, performing for strangers on the internet instead of being with his family. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd been so busy proclaiming his winning to the world that he'd forgotten what he was losing at home. The next 18 hours revealed a side of Charlie Sheen that few people had seen. He drove to Los Angeles in silence, leaving his goddesses, his webcasts, his lawsuits, everything behind. Sarah had arranged for someone to handle the technical shutdown of his broadcast equipment. Charlie didn't ask who or how. He simply got in his car and drove through the night, chain-smoking cigarettes and replaying every conversation he'd had with his father over the past year. He sat in a hospital waiting room, wearing the same winning jersey he'd worn during the webcast, looking like the most defeated man in the world. The jersey that had seemed so defiant an hour earlier now looked like a cruel joke. Hospital staff recognized him but maintained professional distance. A few asked for autographs out of habit, then seemed embarrassed by their request when they saw his face. Emilio was there when Charlie arrived. Their sister, Renee, flew in from New York on the first flight she could catch. Their mother, Janet, hadn't left Martin's side since the ambulance arrived. She'd been divorced from Martin for 30 years, but love doesn't follow the rules of legal documents. When someone you've shared a life with is dying, nothing else matters. None of them knew what to say to Charlie, the man who'd been dominating headlines for weeks, who'd become a cultural phenomenon, an international punchline, was just a scared son waiting to find out if his father would live. The family had watched his public breakdown from a distance, unsure how to intervene. Now they were united by something bigger than Charlie's career, or his problems, or his public persona. At 4:30 a.m., the surgeon emerged from the operating room. Martin was stable. The heart attack had been severe, but he was going to survive. The damage to his heart was significant, but not fatal. He would need months of recovery and lifestyle changes. But he was alive. The family erupted in quiet sobs of relief. Charlie was the last to see his father. The ICU had strict visitation rules, and Charlie had to wait until Martin was fully conscious. When he finally walked into that sterile room, Martin was awake but weak, connected to monitors and tubes that beeped and hummed with electronic life. When Charlie walked into the room, Martin's eyes filled with tears. "Dad, I'm sorry," Charlie said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry for everything. The things I said, the way I've been acting, all of it. I know you tried to help me, and I just kept making it worse." Martin reached for his son's hand with trembling fingers. "You're here now, that's what matters." His voice was hoarse from the breathing tube, but his grip was firm. They didn't talk about the webcasts or the interviews or the drugs. They didn't discuss Charlie's career or his legal battles or his public meltdown. Martin was too weak for speeches, and Charlie was too broken for excuses. Instead, they sat in silence, father and son, two actors who'd spent their lives pretending to be other people, finally being completely honest with each other, without saying a word. The media noticed Charlie's absence immediately. Sheen's Corner was supposed to continue the next day. Interviews were scheduled with major networks. His lawyer was expecting calls about the CBS lawsuit, but Charlie had vanished from the public eye as suddenly as he'd inserted himself into it. His publicist, the one he hadn't fired yet, released a brief statement about a family emergency, but provided no details. For 5 days, Charlie stayed at the hospital. He slept in waiting room chairs that weren't designed for sleeping. He ate cafeteria food that tasted like cardboard. He ignored the hundreds of calls and texts from agents, lawyers, and journalists who were demanding to know where he was. The man who'd been performing his breakdown for the world had finally stopped performing. On the 6th day, Martin was moved out of intensive care to a regular cardiac unit. That evening, he and Charlie had their first real conversation since the heart attack. Martin's color had returned, and his voice was stronger. "I watched some of your shows," Martin said carefully. "The things you were saying. Dad, please. I know. No. Let me finish." Martin's voice was still weak, but steady. "I watched my son disappearing. Every interview, every webcast. I could see less of you, and more of something else. Something angry and hurt and scared. It was like watching you drown in public." Charlie looked down at his hands. They were shaking slightly. "I didn't know how to stop the cameras. Any of it. The whole thing just became bigger than me. I started doing it because I was angry about getting fired. But then it became this thing that people expected. They wanted Crazy Charlie. So I gave them Crazy Charlie. But somewhere along the way, I forgot where Charlie ended and the performance began." Martin squeezed his son's hand. "It's not bigger than you, Charlie. You're still here. You can still choose who you want to be. That's the thing about rock bottom. It gives you a solid foundation to build on." 3 days later, Charlie made his first public statement since the aborted webcast. It wasn't a rant or a performance or a lawsuit threat. It was a simple message posted on his Twitter account. "Taking time to be with family. Thank you for your concern about my father. He's recovering well. So am I." That was it. No tiger blood. No winning. No attacks on enemies or claims of special powers. Just a son who'd almost lost his father and had remembered what actually mattered. The response was immediate and surprising. Thousands of supportive messages poured in. People who'd been mocking him weeks earlier were now offering prayers and encouragement. The transformation wasn't immediate or complete. Charlie Sheen didn't suddenly become a different person, but something fundamental had shifted. The manic edge was gone. The desperate need to be constantly performing had faded. When he did eventually return to giving interviews, they were different, calmer, more reflective. He spoke about his father's heart attack as a wake-up call, though he was careful not to make it sound like a neat Hollywood ending. Years later, Charlie would say that March 15, 2011, was the day he realized he'd been drowning. "I'd been so busy talking about winning that I'd forgotten what I was supposed to be winning at. Fame, money, attention, all of that stuff disappears the moment you think you might lose someone you love. My father's heart attack saved my life by reminding me what life actually was." The clip of Charlie freezing on camera that day has been watched millions of times. People still debate what they saw in his face during those 15 seconds of silence. Was it fear? Realization? The moment a public persona cracked and revealed the human being underneath. Film students analyze it as a masterclass in unguarded emotion. Psychologists reference it when discussing the difference between performing pain and experiencing it. Martin Sheen recovered fully from his heart attack. He lived another 12 years, during which he and Charlie rebuilt their relationship slowly, carefully, honestly. They worked together on a small independent film about fathers and sons. They appeared together at charity events. Most importantly, they had regular dinners where Charlie wasn't performing and Martin wasn't lecturing. They were just family. When Martin died in 2023, Charlie delivered a eulogy that was everything his webcasts had never been: genuine, humble, and grateful. "My father never stopped believing in me," Charlie said at the funeral, his voice steady but emotional. "Even when I stopped believing in myself, even when I was performing my pain instead of dealing with it, he saw through all the noise to the person I could still become." That's what fathers do. They see the person you can become and love you enough to wait for you to find your way there. The irony of Charlie Sheen's story is that his most human moment happened in front of the largest audience of his career. Millions of people watched him receive devastating news and saw him transform from a caricature back into a person. They witnessed the exact moment when someone who'd been desperately performing strength finally allowed himself to be vulnerable. That Tuesday in March, Charlie Sheen learned something that all his success and failure couldn't teach him. Sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is stop talking and start listening. Sometimes winning means admitting you've been losing all along. Sometimes the cameras need to keep rolling so you can see who you really are when you stop trying to be someone else. The cameras kept rolling that day because Charlie forgot to turn them off. In trying to control his narrative, he'd captured the moment when the narrative began to control itself. And in that moment of complete vulnerability, of complete humanity, he'd shown the world something more valuable than any performance: what it looks like when someone remembers who they really are. The webcast equipment in his Mulholland Drive home remained untouched for months. The cameras, lights, and microphones became relics of a different person's life. When Charlie finally had the equipment removed, he didn't sell it or donate it. He had it destroyed. Some chapters he'd learned needed to be ended completely, not passed on to someone else.